Got that going. Um, we are, by way of context here, Jesus has started in chapter 9 to make his way to Jerusalem, although it takes him 10 chapters in Luke in order to get there. And he is teaching and healing those along the way and admonishing, as the case may be. And there are situations where he gets invited to dinner or to lunch at people's homes, or maybe he invites himself. Here at the beginning of chapter 14, he's into the house of one of the leaders of the Pharisees, and things go on there not in the way that the Pharisee, either that one or the others that were there, were expecting. Jesus uses the opportunity to teach them some lessons. Verse 25, now large crowds were going along with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Right off the bat here, we have Jesus saying some things that don't sound like what we think Jesus ought to sound like. He sees these crowds of people, and they're all interested in Jesus. They're all intrigued by Jesus. However, probably most of them are not truly followers of Jesus yet. Someone talked about a college professor and asked him about one of his students in his class. And the teacher replied, well, he would attend my lectures, but I don't know that I would call him a student. Not paying him a whole lot of tribute there. The student may have shown up. That doesn't mean he listened or learned anything. And so we have all these crowds here flocking around Jesus. As he goes, the crowds get bigger because of the healings that he does, the way that he teaches is just so different from what they've heard all their lives. And they are no doubt astounded and want to see more. Jesus is the greatest show on earth. With him coming through, if he came through our town, what would we do? Everybody would want to go see him, without a doubt. So Jesus replies, he turns, we see him at different times here, and I've pointed this out before. He's speaking directly to the disciples sometimes here in Luke, and oftentimes others are overhearing, or he's speaking loud enough for others to hear. Other times he's speaking to a specific group, like the dinner at the Pharisee's house, or an individual. But here he turns to the crowds at large and says, if you want to follow me, if you do not hate your father, mother, wife, children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even your own life, you cannot be my disciple. Shocking, I'm sure, to those who heard this. As Jesus goes on, I'm sure there were those, Jesus probably had the intended effect to thin out this crowd a bit that was following him. The discipleship is costly, Jesus is saying, and we'll see in the next several verses here. When he says hate, well, that's not really what Jesus is about. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, as the verse goes in John 3. It's not a matter of hate. Is our relationship with God such that we put it first before everything else? Is it deep enough so that when we compare any other relationship to it, it seems like hate or neglect, maybe by comparison. You know, some folks will say they have seen some folks have had the situation come across where family members don't understand when we became a Christian, and they're upset about it. And it's like, you don't care about me anymore. You hate me, don't you? Because of our newfound relationship with Christ. And if we haven't experienced that ourselves, we've certainly heard of those where that has happened. Jesus is saying, you need to put him first. When I was in grade school, and there were teachers in Sunday school class. When I was quite young, somebody used the phrase joy, the J-O-Y, that we need to put Jesus first, others second, and yourself last, J-O-Y. And put the right things in priority-wise in your life. You know, these guys are going to hang around today, but as Jesus leaves their town, are they going to truly follow him? They're interested, they're probably intrigued, but they're not followers. Verse 28, or verse 27, whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. When I was, again, in grade school and in junior high, living outside of a big metropolitan area up in the Northeast, there was a new school going in and lots of activity here, not too terribly far from that city center. And then something happened. The workers' union had a problem, and work suddenly stopped as the workers went on strike. And from what I understand, the way that building began and stopped, there were problems with it thereafter. And eventually they got back into trying to finish it, and the concrete was set in some ways that they couldn't proceed. There were structural issues with the building that they had not anticipated, and I believe they ended up having to tear the place down and start over. Not any specific lesson there, but the idea being, make sure you are ready to finish what you start, he seems to be saying. Verse 31, or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. This analogy that Jesus gives, a leader of a nation or a city-state at the time, an empire, is going to be attacked by another. And so he says, well, he has 20,000 men, I only have 10. Can I take him on? Let's see if Bunny can join us this way. Can I take on an army of that size or not? Some of you may have studied some history about Alexander the Great and some of the things that he did his smaller army taking on much larger armies, and he lost very few battles. But you know that he worked hard to consider, was he going to attack or sue for peace? And so that kind of activity, Jesus is saying, needs to go on in our lives, or at least in the lives of these crowds that are following him. Are you ready for this? Yes, it's new and it's wonderful and it's powerful. It's life-changing. But have you counted the cost? Are you going to be able to finish this? So then, in verse 33, none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all his own possessions. Therefore, salt is good, but even salt has become, if it has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Oh, this approach, Jesus is saying, what are you willing to give up for me? What is it in your life that you hold near and dear to yourself, to your heart, that's going to come between you and Jesus? Someone has said that, salvation, what's the cost of salvation? Well, it's free. It is God's gift to us. However, the annual subscription fees are everything. God asks for not just this piece of ourselves or a piece of that part of our lives or this fragment, but all of us, our entirety, he wants to take. Not because he is selfish, but he's going to give it back to us, and even better than it was before. Okay, questions about this or thoughts? Anything strike you as unusual, or you want to know more about, or something I didn't cover before we get into chapter 15? Now, the context coming up here, again, is who's Jesus with, who's around him, and probably as Jesus is either in a marketplace or going through a town, or maybe even between towns. The reactions of the crowds are telling. Chapter 15, verse 1. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to listen to him. As something about Jesus to where these undesirables wanted to be around him. Jesus does not chase them off. They want to hear what he has to say. Jesus was compassionate towards everyone, but especially those that no one else wanted. In the Chosen TV series, for those of you who've watched it, it's specifically the Matthew character. As you see how he is despised by all those around him because he's a collaborator, and he is taking probably more than he should, getting his livelihood off the backs of the people and collecting for their oppressors, the Roman government. So tax collectors were not well liked. And then sinners, those who had done things that were publicly known to be quite bad, those who were ashamed, those who had been publicly shamed, these folks that nobody wanted to be around or socialize with, Jesus spends time talking with them. They want to hear what Jesus has to say. Verse 2, both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." The scribes and Pharisees were those who were experts in the law. They studied it, they pored over the law of Moses, and were looking for how they could follow it better. In fact, they felt that they followed it so much better than anyone else that they looked down their noses at a lot of other people. And when there were these undesirables around, these were the people that they didn't care for at all. The idea of a sinner, those who did not follow the law very well at all, were considered with contempt by the Pharisees. And when Pharisees apparently at the time had a saying that there is joy in heaven when a sinner is obliterated, when they are taken out of this life, because they're sinners. They can't follow the law nearly as well as we do. Jesus is an interesting guy. He certainly acts like a prophet. He seems to be doing miraculous things. I'm not sure, though, if he's righteous enough. Oh my goodness, look at who he is associating with. This man receives sinners and eats with them. Jesus, in this chapter, gives us 3 parables that are directly responding to the Pharisees' attitude and the things that they say. And they all deal with lost things, and increasing in value with each story, the item that was lost and then found. And the lesson was specifically for those who had this self-righteous attitude, this desire to show how good they were by pointing out the faults in everyone else. How dare he sit and eat with these guys? How dare he spend time with those sorts of people? So he told him this parable, verse 3, saying, what man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost." Sheep were a common everyday thing that the people at the time, and really today, even in that part of the world, would come across. Sheep were not known to be terribly bright. They would sometimes get themselves in binds and stuck, or they would just kind of wander away. And the shepherd, sheep had a value. They were valuable to the shepherd. They were his livelihood. He was going to get wool. He was going to get meat from them. They had a monetary value if he was to sell any of them. So to lose one was important, and he needed to go find it. And these parables here are often called the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Those are not really remarkable things. These things happen and happen all the time. What is really the point of these lessons is the good shepherd that finds his lost sheep, and the efforts that he goes through to retrieve it. as will be those who seek and find in the next two parables. I tell you, in the same way, verse 7, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. You know, it's good that those other sheep stayed in the fold, and we're glad that they did, but one, the sheep's not too smart. He wandered away. Oh, but he's now been found, and the shepherd rejoices and wants to share that joy with his friends and his family. And so for the Pharisees to act this way, Jesus is saying we should rejoice because those who are at the margins of society, those who nobody else wants, are coming back into the fold. God himself is in the recovery business. You know, we think about businesses that realize they're going to lose a customer, or there'll be a customer that doesn't pay, or they'll lose some product, and there'll be a built-in acceptable business loss that they will have in their business plans. God isn't that way. A 1% loss, like in this case, not acceptable to God. He wants all to come back into the fold. Verse 8. Or what woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses one, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin which I had lost." How many of you lady folk have lost an earring or a necklace? And if it's at times maybe it's a special one that had special meaning, someone who got it for you. It's especially meaningful, and you've lost it. Where did it go? Yeah, a lot of effort. You will make a lot of effort in order to try to find that piece of jewelry. And if you're fortunate enough to have found it, you're going to rejoice. Maybe you told your friends, I've lost my favorite earring, or one of the two, or something like that. And then to know that you found it. Verse 10, in the same way, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. You know, at times at church, a number of years ago, I won't name any names, but we had our prison ministry. And some of the prisoners, those who were incarcerated, would be able to go out on leave, and they would worship with us. This particular gentleman would arrange it for these folks to come in, and someone went and opened the door for them at one particular Sunday, and they were enthusiastic about it and happy to see the folks that were coming in. Someone nearby was sitting in a chair and said something like, "Well, I wonder why some of the rest of us didn't get that kind of a greeting." And I didn't say anything at the time, and as far as I know, it never happened again. But there was this attitude of, no, why are those folks here? Why did they come to our congregation? Why are they here today? Well, is there a better place for them to be? Is there a better place for the lost to be than in church? and even better in our church. And so it's easy to see a newcomer that is, I don't know about that person. They don't look quite right. They don't dress right. And they kind of smell, whatever the case may be. And we're not necessarily real happy that they're there. This joy over this found sheep or this found coin is apparently, Jesus is saying, this is what God is feeling at times like that. So we have to be careful of our attitudes and be careful of our thinking and be generous with ourselves and our time and our attention and our praise, because God certainly is. Certainly we all have done things in our own life that we're not proud of, and God welcomes us back with this same level of enthusiasm. Just be careful. Verse 11. Someone has said that these verses, clear to the end of the chapter, 21, 22 verses or something like that, are perhaps the greatest short story that has ever been penned in all of humanity. This story about the lost son, this prodigal son, prodigal meaning wasteful, as we know the story. This wasteful son, as we look at it, is one of God's greatest stories that he's preserved, not just for us, but for all mankind, because of the attitudes that come out. Let's read that. And he said, a man had two sons. The younger of them said to his father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. And this was a pretty not very good thing to do. In families at the time, there would be, as far as inheritance went, if a man had two sons, his inheritance would be broken up into 2/3 of it for the older son and 1/3 for the younger, a double portion for that oldest child. But that would be done at the passing away of the father, not before, like this younger son is asking for. Last part of verse 12, so he divided his wealth between them. Can you imagine? Dad, why don't you go ahead and give me my inheritance now? You're going to be dead one of these days, and why don't I just get it today? And can you imagine the hurt that his father probably felt? Oh, the indignity probably that this older brother felt, and rightly so. This is not something you do. And not many days later, verse 13, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. Not only was he not very smart to get his inheritance early, but he wasted it all. Verse 14, now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating. And no one was giving him anything. No one was giving anything to him. Now, if this was a a Jewish family, probably was. Then this formerly good Jewish boy, who now is messed up, and not only is he wrong in the head, but his whole life is pretty messed up now, is now dealing with pigs, which were forbidden for Jews to touch. They were unclean animals. And he had so little that he wants to eat whatever the swine are eating because they're eating better than he is. The word here, in verse 16, he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating. Apparently this is from something called a carob tree, the seeds off of it, and they're not digestible. They have a strong cellulose component, which we can't digest. But they look better than what this kid had, which was probably nothing at all. Verse 17, but when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father. You know, he came to himself. Supposedly, some shepherds who had lost their sheep would at times find them in tough situations. You know, when I was in Colorado a number of years ago, getting up on top of some of the mountains up there, there was a shepherd and his sheep. And although it was a summer day, there were still patches of snow here and there. And shepherd had this tent. I never did actually see the shepherd, but the sheep, if they weren't careful and wandered off, could easily get themselves in a bind on the side of a mountain, something like that. And supposedly a story went that the shepherd was telling someone about this, and a situation where this happened, and the sheep got stuck in a crevasse or on a ledge where there was some grass or something it wanted to eat. And the shepherd said, I'm going to leave him there a few days in the cold and the wind at night, and then I'll come get him later. And he was asked, well, why wouldn't you get him right away? He says, well, sometimes, these, like I said, these sheep are not too smart. I can hop down, next to them or on the same ledge, but sometimes it scares the sheep so much they'll hop off the ledge, and that will be the end of the sheep. And so what I do is I wait until they are good and tired and worn out, exhausted, so that even when I'm jumping down next to them, they won't scamper away. And so, in a sense, sometimes we get ourselves in jams deeply and stuck out on a ledge. Maybe God doesn't grab us off that ledge right away, and we need to understand our predicament. And when God does send someone to rescue us, we are ready to jump into their arms and allow ourselves to be rescued and brought back. Well, that's certainly what's happened with this young man. Is he's in a bad way, and then he comes to himself. This idea of self-inspection, self-reflection. where we look at our lives and say, is this the right thing that I'm doing? Is this the right thing that is good for my family, good for me, good for God, good for the community? Is this the type of thing I should be involved in? So often, when we get ourselves in jams, we're too busy thinking about what we want, what we like, and not so much the broader view. And so when Jesus says this young guy came to himself, that self-reflection where we take a critical look at our lives and say, is this something I should be doing? Probably not. I need to come home. I need to go back to where it's safe. You know, those servants do better than I do. So why don't I just go back and be a servant in my Father's house? So he gets up there in verse 20, and he came to his father. His father, though, while the young man was still a long ways away, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Son begins his speech that he's rehearsed probably many times on the way home. Verse 21, and the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Father doesn't let him finish his speech. He interrupts and says, verse 22, the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him. And put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and he has come back to life. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. Jesus talking about the good shepherd and his diligence in finding the sheep. The good woman who found her missing coin, and the really good father who was looking for his son, hoping for the day that his son would return. You know, we are so distant in time and place from things in the Bible that it's easy to miss some of the nuance, or what to us would be nuance, but to the people of the day would have been utter shock when Jesus talked about this young man asking for his inheritance early. Can you imagine the crowd just like, this shocking moment when he says this. And then when he's off and he's feeding pigs, scandalous. And then for Jesus to come along and talk about this father who by all rights, at best, maybe he should have listened to his son's speech and put him in over there in the servants' quarters. You know, that's certainly more than he deserves. This father is happy that his son is back, embraces him and wants him to be part of the family again. When congregation I spent my formative years up in the Northeast, there was a young man in our youth group who was troubled. He was also the preacher's grandson. Preacher's kids seem to have it worse at times. And there was always something a little unusual about him. We moved away and I didn't hear anything about him, just before high school. I didn't hear anything until years later. And apparently he had gone way off the deep end and led a pretty sinful life, pretty riotous life. His family Well, it wasn't so much that they disowned him, he disowned them. He didn't want to be around them anymore. They weren't going to accept his lifestyle. And then I'd heard through the grapevine and years later that he had come back. And that gentleman who's no longer around, even where we were going to church at anymore, where he was at, this now elderly preacher had said, this young man has come back. He's now part of the family again. And I just, ever since I've heard about it, I wondered what it would have been like to have him back in their midst after all the trouble that apparently he had caused them. Well, in this case, this father is so happy. He's like, let's bring everyone in. Let's have a celebration. Get the best robe, which was probably the father's robe. It would have been the best in the house. Put a ring on his hand, which is a sign of honor. Sandals on his feet. He was probably barefoot. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Oh, you only did that with very special occasions or very special sacrifices. Let's eat and celebrate. He was dead, the son of mine, and now he has come back. He's come to life again. He's lost and has been found. No waiting to celebrate for his father. However, we know there's more to the story. Verse 25, now his older brother was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard the music and dancing. And he summoned one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, your brother has come back, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him back safe and sound. Probably the servant was excited as well. They're having a party in there. But he, the older brother, he became angry and was not willing to go in. Now, I'm not going in there. Heavens no, why would I do that? His father came out. This is kind of rude, making your father come out to see you like this. His father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. And yet you have never even given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. So rather than be happy, Mr. Goody Two-Shoes' older brother, who never does anything wrong, is extremely jealous. What do you mean you're doing it for this guy? We've written off the little brother is dead. How could you do this? You've never done anything like this for me. Verse 31, and he said to him, son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found. Those Pharisees who heard this, I'm sure, did not miss the lesson that Jesus was teaching. And I'm sure their righteous indignation, after having been shocked a few times with what all Jesus has said, they can see the selfishness, the self-centeredness of this older brother in Jesus' story. And then it dawns on them, he's talking about us. can you imagine it either went one of two ways. Either they were touched by Jesus' story and realized they should not be criticizing Jesus for, remember the context here, the tax collectors and the sinners are around. Jesus is finding them like the lost sheep or the lost coin or the lost son. And he's overjoyed. God is overjoyed for having these undesirables come back into the fold, come back and be part of the family. And this older brother, wow, we're playing his role, being pretty mean and nasty about it. So either they were humbled and realized they shouldn't be acting this way, or they probably a lot of them became even more indignant about it and were more upset how Jesus was painting them in a really bad light. As we will see in the chapters to come, enough of these Pharisees are so upset by Jesus reacting to their teachings and their actions, their indignation grows to where they can't stand it anymore, and they look to get rid of this troublesome prophet that's making us look bad. You know, I don't like the news that I'm hearing, so I'm going to go shoot the newsman. I'm going to kill the messenger. Is what they eventually get around to do. As we, spoiler alert, we all know what's coming down the road. So Jesus laying it on the line with them and exposing their hypocrisy and their terrible attitudes, their awful example to those around them, eventually leads them to their hatred of him grows and they want to get rid of him. So as Jesus' journey to Jerusalem goes on, this ratchets up more and more throughout the book of Luke, and you'll see it in other things and in other teachings. All right, I've rattled on for the better part of an hour. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts, insights, something I might have missed?
Just another great lesson. I mean,
well, thank you.
I love this lesson tonight. It was so good.
Yeah. Well,
I've heard it before.
It's pretty good material. So, you know, I want to say it's hard to mess it up. It's easy to mess it up. Hopefully I get the message through. But the lessons is certainly for us as well, in that the self-reflection that the young man has, where he realizes his condition, needs to apply to us as well. Not just when we're in the weeds, you know, out where we shouldn't be, but also when we're in the position of that older brother. And remember that we are all that younger brother. We are all lost, and God has found us and calls us back into the fold. And that rejoicing in heaven isn't just for that one younger brother, but also for us. And if the older brother would change his mind and his attitude, there would be rejoicing as well. So lesson is pretty obvious, I would think. Other thoughts, questions, comments, cat calls.
Well, you had mentioned something. I can't remember exactly what it was. I'm sorry, but where he was really harsh. Oh, yeah. It's where he said, and I missed that part, but he said, you know, you've got to hate your brother and hate your family and all that. Okay.
Yes.
And then the other coin is the second greatest commandment is, well, love everybody. What was the, you know, that's our second greatest commandment, right? Love everybody. And So how do we, because that's controversial. That's like an oxymoron or whatever. I don't know if it's an
Yeah.
oxymoron, but
Well, it's unusual to hear that in Jesus, hear him say this. But two things is you need to put God first in your life. Remember the parable about the dinner guests where I bought these oxen, I bought some land, and I can't come to your feast because I've got to go check these things out. I just got married and I can't show up, that sort of thing. The excuses for not coming in. What are you putting before God? What are you putting priority-wise ahead of him? And your relationship with God needs to be so strong and so prioritized that those other relationships could be considered hateful or neglectful by comparison. Now, no, he's not teaching to be hateful or neglectful, but we need to have the pendulum swing in the correct direction and have our priorities right. Well, I
so,
can't do this because my family's in the way, my possessions are in the way, that sort of thing.
so could they have used the word hate incorrectly? Could that have been translated from some other word that they just didn't have the word for it and they used the word hate?
No, there was hate was a pretty clear term. I'll pull up the Greek word here momentarily and say precisely what it is, but there's no confusion about the term itself. They were perhaps using it in an intense way to think, how do we, by way of comparison, miseo is the Greek verb, which to dislike strongly with the implication of aversion and hostility, to hate or to detest. If your love for something in this world, even a relationship, keeps you away from God, then you need to evaluate that priority very carefully and put things in the right context, I think is what he's getting at. Also, there's a bit of shock value for the crowds because it says in the verses immediately before that there were more and more crowds piling up following Jesus. And perhaps he did it to kind of chase the onlookers off, as it were, because there were too many. They were interested in Jesus, but they weren't really followers. And so let's raise the bar a bit. How far are you willing to go to be my disciple? I don't know that I answered everything that you asked there, but.
No, that was fine. That was
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Anything else?
I had heard in the story of the prodigal son, when the father sees his son and runs out to him, that's not something that they did during that time. It would be kind of shocking for the father to run. So it was just shows the importance of the father placed in the son and how much he cared for him.
Yeah,
So
there were a lot of shockers in that story for the audience that heard it. Then we'd think, well, yeah, it's a good father. No, you would send a servant to go run, get something. You wouldn't do it yourself. That's a good point, Josh. I appreciate that.
I was going to say it too, but I didn't. No.
All right, we'll give you credit. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate your being here this evening. I'm seeing a few folks that were not on the email list, so I'm trying to vary my email distribution. And also, it has come to my attention that it's not easy to set up a Zoom account, not as easy as I thought. the best thing to do is take your phone and hand it to one of the kids to go set it up for you. But if folks need help, I'm more than willing to spend some time with folks, helping them get it set up with a Zoom account and have them join in with us. So if you know folks that are interested but don't know how, by all means, let me know. Get them in touch with me. We'll get them fixed up. Thank you all. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.